time, right? Yeah, it's time. And so we do want to make the most of this time that we have with our experts. And so we'll ask Dara, from you didn't get a lot of time during the last session to kind of elaborate more on this topic that's so critical. What didn't you get to share, or what other things do you want to share with folks that you think is important?
Sure. So thank you for that. Thank you for having me. Always good to be in space with you, Dr. Corbett. I touched on I talked about the multiple laws that protect disabled people, even inside the prison system. So the ADA, of course, is Americans with Disabilities Act. But before that, you had the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which actually is more of the foundation of the civil and human rights for people with disabilities. And I think it was touched on a little bit about education, whether I think Kevin said it being a right, and being a privilege. And for our people, we had to fight to make sure that education was actually included within the ADA for students above the age of 18. So students, I guess pre-K through 18 or through high school, it's the IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act. So, and that's where it proves that people, and FAPE, or that you have to have a fair and education, and we have the right to that. And what I touched on a little bit about the ugly laws, which came from San Francisco and really set the tone for the foundation in this country. That was the 1900s. Where people, like I said, they weren't allowed in public spaces. So people would keep their disabled family members in the home, never allowed to go to have education or anything. And then in the 1930s, with FDR and his racist and ableist New Deal, many people don't want to talk about that, but what he did was set up institutionalization. It is a racist, right? You've seen, people have shown and proven, scholars, about him setting up segregated housing and redlining through the New Deal. He made it so that Black people couldn't own homes. Well, he also made it so he took those ugly laws and created institutionalizing disabled people. So instead of keeping them at home, right, especially those disabilities when you're born and you can see it immediately, they said put them in an institution. Okay, and I give you this background so you can understand. So for, another 100 years, disabled folks were not even seen. Like they were not part of the community. So then if you're disabled and you get put into the system, a system that doesn't recognize you, you're not recognized on the outside, you're definitely not going to be recognized on the inside. People with disabilities on the inside of prison systems literally don't even get to do any kind of programs where you can reduce your sentence because you work in a certain area of the prison. They're not offered that. Our people are not offered that because prison systems don't want to follow those laws. The Rehab Act, which the Rehab Act says that any institution receiving federal funds must give a civil and human right to disabled people. And so, there's not a prison system, a jail in the country that don't get federal funds or even state funds. And so you have to do that. And you'll hear people say, oh, they're violating Section 504. That's what they're talking about. It's the Rehab Act, Section 504 of the Rehab Act. There's multiple sections of the Rehab Act. Section 702 is the section that created my Centers for Independent Living. And I bring them up, if we try to work with institutions and systems, if they use the CILs as resources, we could help provide the reasonable accommodations that someone would need on the inside. But prison systems won't do that. They just feel like the ADA does not apply to this community. So you have the Rehab Act, that says, okay, also, you're doing this for these people, you have to do that. You have the ADA, Title II of the ADA is where this falls in for public entities. Again, anyone receiving federal funds. But then there's Title III for private entities. So if, these private prisons try to say, well, it's not part of us, we're like, nah, Title III covers you, saying the same language. If you create a program for one person, you have to make it accessible and equitable for all. And that's not happening. That's never, I've been to many different, I've reviewed many education system programs in the prison systems, and they won't do it. And they won't do those things that we were saying that our students need in order to obtain their education.
That's a great point. Will and I had spoken prior to this. I served 19 years in Texas, and I am a Braille transcriber. It's a skill set I learned while incarcerated. So we transcribe books for the blind across agencies across the United States. But if you had a blind offender wanting to read a book, we could not accommodate that. And I never understood why not. We are there in the facility. She's housed with me, but we can't provide like Harry Potter. Where is that? So Dr. Corbett brought up a good point. How can we equip students incarcerated, system impacted, to advocate for themselves in those settings?
Sure, and exactly what you said, Alexa. And I've heard people tell me the same story. They're like, but wait, we provide, because in the system, employment is that is exactly right, like you said, transcribing books and things like that. So a couple of things. So in the Rehab Act, you have the CILs, the Centers for Independent Living, which you can use. Our CILs are there for advocacy. We have a 5-prong. One is advocacy, and you can use them for that, to advocate for someone in the system. The other is there's a national network called the PNA, the Protection and Advocacy Network. They are the civil rights lawyers for people with disabilities. I used to work for them, the National Disability Rights Network. They're a big organization. You can go to ndrn.org. Again, so not in the Rehab Act, but they had the DD Act, the Developmental Disability Act, was right before the Rehab Act. There's 3 sets of institutions in there to help people out. One is the PNA. And so they came about because the closing of Willowbrook in New York, I don't know if you know, it was a horrible place where that's what we say, institutions are horrible for people. And Senator Jacob Javits, if you know the Javits Center, he was a Republican. Back when Republicans and Democrats worked together, he created the PNA system. And so there's one in every state, one in every territory, and one that is specifically for Native Americans. So if you have any indigenous folks, you want to use the Native American PNA to help the indigenous folks who are on the inside. And what they do is this. There's about 18 of them who are actively working in the prison system. All of them have to do something, but they do that. Disability Rights Washington is one of the best in the country. And they even have a program that's called Rooted in Rights. And one of their programs is they go inside the system. The PNA lawyers are the only lawyers who can go into a system unannounced. They can look at any files they wish to look at, whether it be the person's institutional file, educational file, medical file. They can talk to whoever they wish in the facility, from the janitor to the ward. Why? Because they're looking for abuse. So you don't tell people when you're coming, because then they send home Tommy and Michael and Jack and whoever who beat up everybody, or they like, don't come in today because when people are coming here.
That's exactly right.
2 is when you talk to people, it's usually the janitors who tell you, oh, go over in that ward because they treat those people like crap. It's usually those people tell you. And then 3rd, with the records, they can look and see. That's how we know. That's how, when I'm talking and they say you need to have receipts, the PNAs have the data where they literally just like they're federally funded, right? They don't have to no RFP for their money. They are actually appropriated program, which is something social justice people need to learn. We need to stop trying to do these programs that are not appropriated, right? Because when you're not when you're not in the president's budget, you get zeroed out. So anyway, they're not appropriated. Right. They just get their money every year, regardless, right? So that's how they get funded. And when whoever receives federal funding, right, you have to do a PPR. You have to tell them what you did with your money, right? Your performance review. And so in those performance reviews, those people who go in the prison systems are looking in our files of our disabled people who are in the system and saying education 0, 0. Like they know they're not affording these people the courses and the classes that they should. like I said, let's not even get to higher ed. I mean, they just can't even get them. We have a lot of people who go in the system who are trying to get a high school diploma. And they really can't because of the developmental disabilities. But these are advocates who will do that. The ACLU has a prison research program. They're pretty good. And the PNAs and the ACLUs work together in cases and things like that. But if you know someone, who has an issue or concern, or even if you want to do that work, you can join with the PNAs. I heard a lot of students on here. There's so many ways you can use your degree to help out, or if you're working for a degree. So I say this to people, like I'm a strategist and think ahead. Even though the protection and advocacy, we say civil rights lawyers, there are social workers, there are benefit specialists, there are people who do kind of like research and analysis who work in the PNA. And you, as someone, formerly incarcerated, could come and work for them because you know the system, right? You could be a social worker for them and say, oh, well, I can go into that prison system and talk to these people on the wardens and things like that. I know these corrections officers, I know that. So they will always need your help. I just say that. And they specifically really need some Black, Indigenous people of color. That's the last thing I'll say. The disability rights community is very white.
Yes.
Very much white. It is white centered. That's why I made it very clear that I do disability justice. Disability rights centers white folks, and it's for white folks. Those 10 principles I mentioned, they will never engage in that. But disability justice folks will, and the PNAs are engaged with disability justice work. So those are some areas where you could have advocates.
Can you unpack that concept of disability justice and like what you mean by that? And then earlier you shared the first and the last principle, but we didn't get the other 8. I don't know if like
if you want to between so so no problem. So what happened was it's not new to social justice. A lot of times people will try in the disability rights community, a lot of Black disabled people try to work with the disability rights community for years, for I would say 10, 15 years. And it didn't work. They just were not going to remove, they don't accept racial justice. They tell us they're not racist because they're disabled. There's no way they could be racist because they don't understand the concept of racism. So around 2016, some young queer disabled folks got together and said, we've had enough, and they created disability justice. And you can Google disability justice and the 10 principles will come up. And what they felt was everything that they were angry about in disability rights not doing, they put into disability justice. So like I said, the first is intersectionality, meaning covering everyone. And this group is a group of LGBTQ Black disabled folks. Black, Indigenous, people of color folks. And so a couple of the other ones are, that you have to have directly impacted people at the table, right, to make decisions. That whatever we do, we cause no harm to people, because the disability rights community consistently causes harm, right? There's in reference to working together and making sure that you're not only working on policy, right? That's the other thing that people just think. Don't get me wrong, policy is important, but you have to work on programmatic things and things like that. So they have, like I said, they have a list. You can Google it and see. The disability rights community is, and another one is telling the history and telling the true story of disability rights. People right now are really excited about Crypto Camp, which is on Netflix. We boycott Crypto Camp because every book and every documentary that you see about disability rights is white folks. It is centered on white people. That movie is centered on Judy Heumann, who was a white woman herself, who, when you see pictures of her, you'll see pictures of her with Black people. There are 3 Black people in that movie. You don't know their names. You don't know their story. They didn't talk about them at all. And this is a movie produced by the Obamas, right? And I was like, how is this possible, right? So they will never discuss Black people. They erased Black people as if they didn't exist. Another example is, many of you have probably heard of the Olmstead case. Olmstead is a Supreme Court case. They always said Olmstead case. It's really now most people, when you say a Supreme Court case, you say both sides. Brown versus the Board of Education, Roe versus Wade, right? You refer to it that way. This is the Olmstead v. Lois Curtis case. Lois Curtis is a Black woman. still very much alive, still in Georgia. She's living her life. They never mention her. She's not important. Instead, they uplift Olmsted, who was the man who oppressed them. He was the head of Georgia State's the Department of Health and Human Services. And what she said when the ADA passed in 1990, Title II was, you need to let me out of here. She's a person who was born with a disability, and her family put her in. She doesn't even know who her family is. They put her right in an institution. And she said she wanted to get out. And she went to court using those the P&A system, and went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court agreed and said she is correct. And so they erased Lois. Lois is not important in the story. Lois is a Black woman who stood up for her rights and said, get me the hell out of here, is not important to them. Olmsted is important to them. And that is when you hear people refer to the fact that institutions should be closed, and they use the Olmsted, they will say Olmsted, and we say Olmsted v. Lois Curtis. It's just little things like that. They think that doesn't mean anything. That is very meaningful, especially to a young Black disabled girl, right? That I'm sitting here telling you that you are where you are because of a Black woman who said, nope, I don't want to be in an institution. That is imperative to the work. And so we in disability justice, wherever we can, we uplift Black disabled folks and in the fights that they've done. So I hope, that's a little bit of unpacking it. Just like, Monday was the ADA, celebration of ADA. All the pictures you see are white people. Is it?
You're correct.
And when we tell, we say this, we're like, you got to be kidding us. I don't know if you know, another thing in their community is the crawl, where right before the ADA was passed, they crawled up the steps of the Capitol. United States Capitol was not accessible, right, in 1989, 1990. The bill had passed in the House, and they were trying to get it passed in the Senate. And so they decided passed in the Senate, and they were trying to get it passed in the House. And they crawled up the steps. And it took almost a day and a half to crawl up the steps. Two things about this. One is they are so when I say don't cause any harm, when they refer to it as their Selma of their movement. There you go. Now I see the eye, right? I look, the first time I heard that, I was like, but in Selma, you do realize that those people were beaten and spit on and almost killed, right? Like, these people crawled up the Capitol. The Capitol Police literally helped them, said, oh, okay, go ahead. You had like press, there. I was like, what are you people talking? Like, that's so disrespectful. And then two, they act like nobody helped them. I told you it almost took a day and a half. The people who brought them breakfast, lunch, and dinner while they did the crawl, the DC Black Panthers. The people, they chained them, so they decided to chain themselves when they got into the rotunda. Who brought the chains and who told them to do it? The DC Black Panthers. And so when I learned this reading the Black Panther history, I was like, oh wait, what is happening here? And so you don't hear this. And so I say all that too, to also let you know, they're not going to be doing work in prisons. Right? It's disability justice folk. We do the work because they believe they actually, none of our people are in those prisons, which is correct. None of your white disabled people are sitting up in these prisons. That's not true, but okay. It is mostly Black folks. So they don't really touch on anything on the prison system. That's another thing. They're not going to care about whether or not, you're getting an education, whether or not you're getting the services you need while you're in the system. And let me tell you something else I didn't say here. We, as disability justice people and as Black Indigenous people, believe every person in prison has a disability. And those of you who know, if you've ever been into a prison, right? If it's PTSD, which is a disability, you got it. Like, I've never been in a prison as a inmate. I've been as a visitor, visit my family members who are in prison. As an advocate and an activist, the stench, the smell, the lighting, the fact that someone is telling you when to get up, when to go to sleep, all of those things have got to put people in a place of being a person with a disability.
My thing is when I hear keys rattle, because they wear their keys on their belt. So when I hear a key, I'm automatically looking around to see where the officer is, even now, 3 years out. You bring up a lot of great points. Right. I wanted to ask Dr. Corbin a quick question, if she's still there. Dr. Corbett? Okay. Well, if not, Daria, the dynamic, it's the relationship. Okay. the relationship between the education system and the DOC. What is the dynamic? Do you think it's potential legal threat that we can motivate the DOC to kind of get on board with us, or should we cultivate like on a state by state, one-on-one basis, particular to like if we have a student that wants to say needs larger format print, should we just take it instance by instance, or is it something that we should be advocating that dynamic and building that relationship ahead of time? What are your thoughts?
Oh, you're on mute, baby.
We're all on mute. I was trying to talk to.
You got it, Aaron? Oh, no, you can't. Oh, well, I'll say this. I think we're always better. You're stronger with more numbers.
Okay.
I think that's part of collective liberation as well, is that the people who are on the inside who have the opportunity to and may have a voice to say this to whoever's listening, that you have to think about your fellow person, right? And I think the more stories you get together, the better. Don't get me wrong. I would not say, oh, don't address this with one person, but it is better with numbers, right? It is also better when, I always tell people, you have to know your rights to fight for your rights. So that's the first thing that we tell people when they ask me about advocacy. I'm like, if you have people on the inside, I tell them just read about the ADA. It is seriously one of the easiest bills to know, like laws to know. And there is the ADA.gov. It's free. They can take a course. You learn Title I, you take a test. You learn Title II, you take a test, and it's free. Like you could start it in January and finish it in September. That's how it's set up. We make all our activists who want to work with us take the test. I have to take it every 2 years. And my boss is like, you need to score, we say 85. If you don't score 85, it's all right. But you can't fight for your right if you don't know it. And so I tell I've talked to other inmate people who are in the prison, and I say, listen, learn the ADA, because you can't walk up to somebody, the director of the education program and be like, they're supposed to have this, and they're like, yeah, right. And then you say, oh, because of the ADA Title II, that changes the conversation. It really, I've seen it happen. They're like, oh, wait a minute, because also disabilities are on different levels. There may be some people who have a learning disability, and those people who have learning, like they may be dyslexic, they have a better chance of getting into the higher ed program than are people who are Down syndrome or something like that. Like they'll look at them and say, no way. But you could be dyslexic. Now the dyslexic person, right, is not visible. You can't see that. But you coming and saying, oh, he needs more time to take the test, or she or they need more time to take the test, is because of their dyslexia. It takes them longer to read, right? That is the ADA, that is reasonable accommodation. And if you as a team, as a group, know the ADA and you fight for this person together and say, hey, you're supposed to give him more time. You're supposed to give them more time to take this test. You're supposed to, or offer, even sometimes they offer the test on larger paper, right? Like, okay, I get a paper that's 10 pages and they get a paper that's 20 pages, because they, even their minds and how they look at things, if you make it broader and bigger, it calms their anxiety down, right? There's all kinds of tricks that people know that are offered to that should be offered to students to take. We also have what's called readers. You could have other inmates volunteer and say, I'll read for him for the test, where they read the question, question number 1, what's 1 + 2? And they tell them, a story. So they could do that as well. That is part of the ADA. That is a reasonable accommodation to provide. And it goes back to what Christopher was saying about every student is different. And every student needs different services to get them through the program. It does not mean that because this person that you're reading the test to is not as smart as a person who's reading the test to them, right? It's not right. What is their study partner? They've been in the classes together. Everyone learns at a different way. Some people learn linear, right? Some people learn some people are more readers than they are, right? Your right brain, your left brain, it is not something that psychologists just made up. And it's even more enhanced when you have a disability, that sometimes their right side of their brain is just much more active than their left side of their brain, which means you're going to have to teach in a different way, and they're going to have to take your examinations in a different way. And if you have a community inside the system who knows these laws and can help out, that would help us move that forward. And then on the policy side, you know, Aaron shaking her head, we all work together on the policy side. It's been interesting to push a lot of these professors who are like, oh, yeah, we want to re-up the Pell Grant. And we're all like, you know, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that look like for students? And I think Chris, he hit it right on the head. It's like, you have a vision of what secondary and higher education looks like from a white male perspective. And let me be very clear, right? No, real. And I said, let me be very clear to you, right? As a Black who I went to Rutgers University, which is in Norton, New York, where I grew up. Like growing up, we looked at it and I was like, oh, no way in the hell am I going to Rutgers? It was like, oh, it's like the worst place in the world to go to. You know, I didn't really understand Rutgers till I left, right? So you leave New Jersey and people are like, you went to Rutgers University? I'm like, yeah, it was down the street. It's like a community college for us because it's right in our neighborhood, right? For me, like the Paul Robeson Center, we went to our prom at the Paul Robeson Center, right? It's like, okay, whatever here, right? But so I say that to say, even for me, right, going to Rutgers University, North New Jersey, which is the most dynamic campus in the country, has won for the past 20 years. We have over 200 languages spoken on our campus. Those are the students. That campus is run by white men. Don't let nobody fool you. And so having that perspective of higher ed and academia come into the prison system is quite interesting to watch. And it is quite interesting for us to be vigilant about the language that they provide to Congress around what they want to do with how they reintroduce the Pell Grant system into this system. And it's been people like Dr. Corbett and Black women, specifically, mostly Black women, who have said, oh, hell no, y'all not going to do this like y'all did before. This has to change. This has to, you know, Vivian, you know, we all know each other. Yes. It's like 6 degrees of separation. I tell people, they like, yes, we all know each other. And it's been interesting to see that needle moving. It has moved, you know, I will say this, a particular number of white male scholars have either moved out. Like, this is my thing with white folks. And I DM'd Ludacris for this. I said, I need some lyrics to move white people, get out the way, get out the way. I need you to just, if you're not going to be helpful, then I need you to get out of the way. And some of these white scholars have said, yeah, we can't help out and be in this particular space. And Erin is shaking her head because I literally say to them, I need you to leave. I need you to be out of this space. You are hindering any kind of work we're trying to do here.
You are both exceptional. Thank you so much. I wish we could speak for another hour because there's something all of us are passionate about, but we thank you for the opportunity to share your thoughts and to be a part of the conversation. I think we're about time, Will.
Yeah, we are at about
maybe.
time.
Okay.
Yeah, and so thank you very much. It was amazing to hear, and I could have sat and listened for another hour. We do have our final session, so if you want to go back on the agenda, and you can look there as a closing session, and we'll be joined by Denise Ford, who is our interim CEO at the Education Trust. So hope everyone will kind of migrate back to the closing session.
Thank y'all. You're awesome. You're my hero.
Thank you very much.